When I overheard my daughter whisper, "I'll distract her, and you drive to her house," I thought my heart might stop mid-beat. It was my birthday. A quiet Sunday afternoon filled with the scent of vanilla frosting and the faint hum of the old jazz radio Thomas and I used to dance to. My daughter Clara had insisted on throwing me a small celebration, just her and her husband David. For the first time in years, I was excited. I hadn't celebrated much since Thomas passed away. After his funeral, Clara moved to the city with David, and I stayed here in our old home, surrounded by memories and maybe a little too much silence. When they walked in that morning, arms full of groceries and bright smiles, the house came alive again. Clara's laughter filled the air like it used to when she was a little girl, tugging at my sleeve for more icing while baking with her father. So, when I heard those whispered words, "I'll distract her, and you drive to her house," my mind refused to believe anything but goodness. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe they were going to decorate Thomas's old lake house, the one I hadn't visited since the day he died. I pushed the thought away and smiled when they returned from the hallway. "Mom," Clara said brightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "don't you dare peek in the kitchen, okay?" "The cake's still a work in progress?" I laughed. "Sweetheart, I'm not that impatient." David flashed a polite smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. He'd always been a quiet man, respectful but distant, the kind that looked at people as problems to solve. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, they'd driven all the way from the city just to see me. That afternoon, we sat around the dining table. Clara poured me tea from my favorite porcelain pot, the one Thomas had bought on our anniversary trip to Kyoto, and asked about my garden, my neighbors, my health. For a moment, everything felt normal, but David kept glancing at his watch. When I asked if he was expecting a call, Clara quickly changed the subject, laughing a little too loudly. "Oh, David's just addicted to his emails. He's one of those can't switch off types." He smiled stiffly and nodded, avoiding my eyes. Something didn't sit right. Later, while they were in the kitchen preparing dinner, I excused myself to the hallway. Just to grab my cardigan, I told them. But curiosity tugged at me, heavier than guilt. Their voices drifted through the half-closed door. "Do you remember where she kept it?" David whispered. "Yes," Clara said. "In the study, under the loose floorboard. That's what Dad told me before." My chest tightened. I leaned closer. Before what? There was the sound of something metallic, keys jingling. Then David again, lower this time. "We should go now. It's still early and she'll be busy with the candles." "I'll distract her," Clara murmured. "You drive to her house." The same words, this time sharper, intentional. My pulse pounded in my ears. For the rest of the evening, I moved like a ghost, smiling when they spoke, laughing when expected. My mind raced beneath the surface. When they lit the candles and sang "Happy Birthday," I felt tears sting my eyes, but not from joy. When they asked me to make a wish, I stared at the flames and whispered silently, "Let me be wrong about them." After dinner, Clara said she wanted to take me for a short walk. "Just down to the park, Mom." "You've been cooped up too long," David offered to stay behind and clean up. That was my first confirmation. I forced a smile. "Oh no, I'll tidy later." "You two go. I'm tired. Maybe I'll just sit in the garden for a bit." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, Mom. We'll just step out for some air." I watched from the kitchen window as they walked toward the car. Then Clara turned back, waved, and smiled. But as soon as she reached the corner, David got into the driver's seat. And she didn't. Instead, she stood near the hedge, pretending to text. Then she glanced back toward the house, right where I was watching. My heart thudded. The car pulled away, and Clara stayed behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, staring at the driveway. David didn't return for hours. When he finally did, Clara met him outside. Their voices were muffled, but I caught fragments. Couldn't find it. You sure it's there? Dad said. Then silence. I didn't need to hear the rest. Thomas, the house. They were talking about my husband's old lake house, the one we'd left locked since the day he passed. It wasn't just a house to me. It was a memory, a wound. Thomas had built it himself, back when he dreamed of retiring early and writing a book by the lake. We spent every summer there until he got sick. When he died, I couldn't bring myself to return. Only Clara knew where the keys were. By morning, I had made up my mind. I brewed a pot of coffee, waited until they were both up, and said casually, "I was thinking of visiting your father's lake house today." "It's been years," Clara froze. David's spoon clinked against his mug. "That's sudden." "I just feel ready," I said softly, forcing a smile. "Would you two like to come with me?" Clara's lips parted. "Oh, we were actually planning to head back early." "David has work." "Of course," I said. "Then I'll just go by myself." Their eyes flicked toward each other. That told me everything I needed to know. The drive to the lake house felt longer than I remembered. The road wound through pine trees heavy with morning mist, and the air smelled like damp wood and silence. When I arrived, the sight of it nearly broke me. The porch was still sagging on one side. The faded blue shutters were chipped from years of rain, but the front door, the one Thomas had painted by hand, was open. My stomach dropped. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something faintly metallic. The curtains hung limp and pale, and on the floor near the study, I saw footprints, fresh ones. I followed them. The study door was half open, the hinges creaking when I pushed it. Papers were scattered across the desk. A floorboard near the corner had been pried up, roughly, in haste, and there, beside it, lay my husband's old tin box, empty. My hands shook as I sat on the edge of the desk, staring at that box. Thomas's handwriting still covered the lid. "For Clara, when she's ready to understand." It wasn't money, not jewels. I knew exactly what he'd kept in there. Letters, confessions, his journals, and the truth about his business, his debts, his regrets. Things Clara had never forgiven him for. If she'd found them, she'd know everything. But why take them? Unless she wasn't trying to know her father. She was trying to erase him. I left the lake house that day without touching a thing. By the time I got home, Clara and David were gone. The sink was empty, the cake half eaten, and the birthday card she'd left on the table said only, "Happy birthday, Mom. Please don't go looking for the past. It only hurts." That night, I sat alone by the window again, watching the shadows of the trees stretch across the lawn. The radio hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And all I could think was, what did they do with Thomas's letters? Why were they so desperate to keep me from seeing them? Something told me this wasn't just about family secrets anymore. Something darker was hidden under those floorboards, and I was going to find out. 2 days passed before I heard from Clara again. Her message was brief, a single text that arrived just after dawn. "Mom, I'll come by tomorrow. Please don't go to Dad's house again." No emojis, no heart, just words that felt more like a warning than concern. I stared at that message for a long time, the screen glowing cold in my hands. Then I did what I'd done my whole life. I made tea, sat quietly and pretended everything was fine, pretended I hadn't seen what I'd seen, pretended my own daughter hadn't broken into her father's house to take something she didn't understand. But pretending is a fragile thing. It only lasts until truth decides to breathe. That afternoon, I drove back to the lake house. The air was sharper that day, the lake still as glass. The sun fell in soft golden ribbons through the trees, and the house looked almost peaceful, like it hadn't just become the stage of my heartbreak. I let myself in quietly, careful not to disturb anything. The study was exactly as I'd left it, except for one new detail, a faint smear of mud on the edge of the desk. It hadn't been there before. Someone had been here again. I looked around, and that's when I saw it. In the corner near the fireplace, half buried under dust and fallen plaster, lay something glinting faintly in the light. I bent down and picked it up, a small brass key, the kind Thomas used to keep on his key ring, but not for this house, for our safe deposit box. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't thought about that box in years. We'd opened it once together before his diagnosis. He'd put in old photographs, a marriage certificate, a few important business papers, and something else, a sealed envelope, one he'd made me promise never to open until the time was right. I'd forgotten about it, but apparently Clara hadn't. I drove straight to the bank. The clerk, a woman with a practiced smile, recognized me from long ago. "Mrs. Carter, it's been ages. Would you like to access your husband's box?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. When she slid the metal drawer onto the table, my hands trembled. Inside were the old documents, yellowed at the edges, and that sealed envelope. But it was already open, the flap torn, the contents gone. Only one small slip of paper remained, folded neatly inside. "Clara, my love, if you're reading this, please forgive me. What I did for you, but some truths are meant to rest. Don't let greed bury what love built." My knees went weak. The clerk asked if I was okay. I nodded quickly, stuffed the note into my purse, and left. Greed, love, truth. The words chased me the whole drive home. By the time I reached my house, Clara's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, her eyes red and puffy. When she saw me, she stood up quickly. "Mom, where have you been?" I stopped a few feet away. "The bank." Her face drained of color. "Clara," I said quietly, "why did you go to the lake house?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to know." "Know what?" "That Dad left everything to you." I frowned. Of course he did. I was his wife. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Mom. You don't understand. He told me once, years ago, that he wanted to leave me something too. He said there was money hidden, something he'd saved before his company fell apart. I thought that's what the box was." I stared at her, heart pounding. "So you broke in?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to steal. I thought maybe he left something for me and forgot to tell you." "And David?" Her eyes hardened. "David convinced me to look. He said we could use it to pay off our debts. He said you wouldn't notice my throat tightened." "So that's what my birthday was to you," I whispered. "A distraction." "Mom." "No." I raised a hand. "You came here pretending to celebrate me while your husband drove to the house your father built, to tear up the floorboards where he once read you bedtime stories." Tears blurred my vision. "How could you, Clara?" She took a step forward, desperate. "Mom, please." I thought there was money. We're drowning in bills, and Dad owed so much. "So you took his last words instead," I said quietly. "You took what little honesty he left behind." She sank to her knees on the porch, sobbing. "I just wanted to make things right," she cried. "David said if we could find proof of Dad's debts, maybe we could claim something from the estate. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about her story didn't sit right. If it was just desperation, why take the envelope from the bank? Why hide the note? Why tell me not to go there? Unless she had read something she didn't want me to see. That night, when Clara finally went to bed in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room with that small piece of paper from the envelope. I kept reading Thomas's words over and over. Don't let greed bury what love built. I didn't know what he'd meant. Not yet. But I knew one thing. There was more to this story. Something hidden behind all this guilt and grief. And the person who could tell me the truth wasn't Thomas. It was David. The next morning, I drove to the city. I knew David worked as an accountant at a firm downtown. I waited outside the glass building until I saw him exit, phone pressed to his ear, eyes sharp and restless. When he noticed me, he froze. "Mrs. Carter?" His tone was polite, rehearsed. What a surprise. "I think we both know why I'm here," I said softly. He looked around, uncomfortable. "Let's not do this here." We sat in a cafe nearby. He ordered coffee he never touched. I watched his hands tremble slightly as I set the note on the table. He stared at it, then laughed bitterly. "So you found it." "Where are the letters?" I asked. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "There were no letters, just debts. Your husband wasn't the saint you thought he was. He owed people money. Dangerous people. I was protecting Clara." My jaw clenched. "By breaking into his house? By making sure his mess didn't ruin her life," he snapped. I studied his face. There was something else. Fear, not arrogance. "You're lying," I said. "You're not protecting her. You're using her." He smiled thinly. "Believe what you want." "But your husband wasn't honest with you. That man left you with more than grief. He left you with a secret you don't want to uncover." Then he stood, left money on the table, and walked out. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, the coffee gone cold in front of me, a secret I didn't want to uncover. What could that mean? When I returned home that evening, Clara was gone, her suitcase missing from the guest room. On the kitchen table lay a note in her handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry. I can't face you right now. Please don't go digging anymore. Just let it rest. See." But I'd already spent too many years letting things rest. And this time, I wasn't going to bury another truth. It was past midnight when I finally opened Thomas's old study drawer for the last time. The scent of cedar and paper dust filled the air, the smell of a life once full of dreams. I laid everything I had found on the table, the brass key, the torn note, and the memories that refused to rest. David's words haunted me. Your husband wasn't honest with you. But I knew Thomas. I'd lived every joy and heartbreak beside that man. Whatever secrets he'd kept, they weren't for greed, they were for love. Still, I needed proof. So I searched every file, every book spine, every drawer until I found it. A loose wooden panel beneath the desk, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. When I pried it open, something fell into my lap. An old, dust-covered notebook, Thomas's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. March 3rd, 2017. If anything happens to me, tell Clara the truth gently. I never meant to keep secrets, only to protect her. The money isn't stolen. It was payment for a life I once saved. April 10th, 2017. David came by again. I see what he's doing. Using Clara's fear, feeding her doubts. I warned him once. If he tries to use my daughter again, I'll take everything to the authorities. May 2nd, 2017. If this notebook is ever found, I pray it's by Margaret, not him. I froze. Payment for a life he once saved? And David? Using Clara? I turned the pages until the last entry. written only 2 weeks before Thomas's heart attack, June 14, 2017. He threatened to tell Clara lies about me, said I hid stolen funds, said he'd ruin her marriage if I didn't pay. I refused. But if he tries again, I've left proof in the deposit box, a signed letter, and receipts from the fund's donor. I trust Margaret will protect what love built. The room tilted. Thomas hadn't been hiding money. He'd been protecting Clara. From David. That's why David wanted the envelope. That's why he made Clara help him break in. And that's why my husband's note said, "Don't let greed bury what love built." The next morning, I drove straight to the police station. I handed over the notebook, the torn note, and a flash drive I found taped to the back cover. It contained scanned documents, bank transfers from a charity foundation Thomas had helped years ago. The same fund David had accused him of stealing from. By afternoon, they'd confirmed it. The money had been legitimate. But David, he had been under quiet investigation for embezzling funds from his own clients. He'd used Clara to get close to any assets he could claim, even her father's legacy. The officers promised to follow up. But as I walked out of that station, the only thing I felt wasn't victory. It was exhaustion. 3 weeks passed before I saw Clara again. She came quietly one evening, her hair messy, her face drawn and pale. "Mom," she whispered, standing on the porch like a child again. "They arrested David." I nodded. "I know." Tears welled in her eyes. "You knew before I did, didn't you?" "Yes," I said softly, "and I waited for you to come back." She broke down then, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "I didn't believe you," she cried. "I thought you were just angry." I didn't know what he was doing. He told me Dad was a thief, that we had to protect the family name. I was so stupid. I held her then. Not because she deserved it, but because love doesn't vanish. It just learns to forgive in quieter ways. "I know," I said gently. "We all believe lies when they come from people we love." She nodded against my shoulder. "Dad tried to warn me, didn't he?" "Yes," I whispered. "He did." Even from the grave, weeks turned into months. The legal mess unraveled slowly. David's fraud case grew larger, and Clara testified. It was painful, humiliating, and cleansing all at once. When the dust settled, Clara moved back into the city, started therapy, and began rebuilding, one step at a time. We never spoke much about that birthday again, but sometimes when she visited on weekends, she'd bring flowers for Thomas's grave and stay a little longer each time. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "Mom, I think I finally understand what Dad meant about not letting greed bury what love built." I smiled faintly. It took me a while, too. I still live in the same old house. The lilies bloom outside my window every spring, just like they did the year this all began. And sometimes, when I sit by the lake, I can almost hear Thomas's voice in the wind. He never left me hidden riches or grand estates. He left something better, truth and peace. The kind you only find when you finally stop chasing what was taken and start protecting what still remains. Moral. In the end, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people we love most. But love that survives betrayal isn't naive. It's wise. And forgiveness isn't forgetting the hurt. It's choosing to remember the lesson instead.